Hi, welcome everybody to Guide Share Europe. I've got Pam from IBM to present NetView REST server. Over to you, Pam. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Niall. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about resolving user problems with the Z NetView REST server. I am the NetView architect, and we will have time for questions and answers after the presentation today. But if you think of a question after the fact, my email is on the front of the slides. They have been uploaded. So don't hesitate to send me questions directly if you need to. Okay, so this is just the slide about the GSE UK conference charity raffle. I'm sure you've seen this multiple times, so I will kind of skip over this at this point. And let's just talk about what we're going to cover today with this presentation. So I'm going to do a brief introduction about where these user problems came from, as well as what the REST server is, how to solve problems with your REST server setup, and then how to solve problems if you want to retrieve data from multiple NetViews with just a single REST server. Okay, so introduction. In NetView 6.3, we introduced a REST server, and our REST server provides a modern way to access information from NetView without requiring the web application developers to use a legacy 3270 green screen. We have a suite of APIs, and we also have a Swagger UI web page where you can see the full catalog of our NetView APIs, and you can actually try out these APIs and see how they work. And I've included the URI here to get to the Swagger documentation. I'll show you some screen caps of this later on. Our REST server can run standalone, or it can be accessed by a web application that runs in Zoe. And we do provide a sample on implementing a very simple application using our task API. So the background on the users. So the majority of the problems and the resolutions come from cases that were opened by NetView clients trying to set up and use the REST server. Now, some of these cases came from system automation clients because we do have some common componentry between our two REST servers. Also, sometimes the NetView development team would get direct emails from clients saying, well, can I do this? Can you help me figure out how to do this? I've got it working to a certain point, but I can't quite get it working the rest of the way. And you get my feedback. I had never set up the NetView REST server before preparing this presentation. I had used it. I'm also not super experienced with Unix system services, and I used the latest documentation, but I still needed to ask some questions from the developer experts on the team. So we will be providing some documentation updates in the future. So just some notes. This presentation does focus on setting up the standalone REST server and nothing with Zoe today. And some of the problem resolutions are my suggestions, and there could be other ways to achieve the same goals. Okay, so let's get started here. So the first thing is we've had quite a few APARs with fixes and enhancements. So the most critical APAR that you will need to get your hands on first is a documentation APAR, which essentially rewrites a chapter in our installation configuring additional component books. And so this OA 60116 APAR is a complete rewrite of that chapter of the book to provide more details about how to install the REST server and do proper configuration for it. Then we have our level set APAR for NetView 6.3, where we fixed some last minute problems that came up that we couldn't get fixed before GA. This next one, we talk about issues with NetView SNMP. Well, essentially, this APAR contains some additional packaging fixes that included some things with the REST server. We also had an APAR where the REST server fails to start, had issues with file permissions and names in our USS file system. We did have some enhancements. We added some REST APIs with this OA 59600, as well as made it our REST server available to install with a WAR file. And then we had another APAR processing long command strings and then a suppression character. So I will hit scenarios that cover most of these APARs so you will know what the symptoms are in case you don't have the maintenance. So the best way to avoid problems is apply the maintenance and to follow the documentation in the APAR that I mentioned here and the NetView security reference book in the security for the REST server section. Okay, I just sped too quickly by there. Okay, so these are the high level steps that I ended up using to get the REST server set up and running. So first you need to create some Unix directories for some customized files. Then you need to do some customizing of etc/profile. You need to set up a key store and trust store for the REST server. You also need to customize the REST server application YAML file. There's NetView program customization. You need to set up some user IDs in SAF. And then there's some specific instructions for the proper way for starting and stopping the REST server for it to work properly. Okay, so as far as creating the Unix directories, you need to create a user home directory, which will then have a logs directory and a key store directory. And so a couple of symptoms that we've run into is the sample files in the Zoe sample directly were incorrectly named and the file permissions were incorrect. And that was resolved by OA 59491. I'm not 100% sure if there were other file permissions that were incorrect outside of that particular directory, but it's worth applying that APAR just in case. Also, there was an issue where you could get this NetView server.sh FSUM 7351 not found was seen in the standard outlog when starting the REST server. And this was caused because the user that installed the REST server installed it with a path name that was longer than 44 characters. So if you don't have the maintenance and you're waiting and you still want to play with this, there is a workaround. You can create a symbolic link to the actual install path of the REST server, but you need to keep that path name no more than 44 characters. Okay, customizing Etsy profile. So you need to have an appropriate Java level here. And this is the one that we recommend is Java 8 here with 64-bit, and set an environment variable here. And of course, your path environment variable also needs to include this matching Java path. In our application YAML file, we do have something called nv rest config. You can leave that way and code the environment variable in Etsy profile to set up what your home directory is that you created. On my system, I use this /u/netview/rest server path name, or you're going to end up having to hard code the full path name in the application YAML file. The other thing is you're going to need to set up a maximum address space size for the process if you don't already have one that's of an adequate size. And I'll take you through the different scenarios where I actually ran into some issues because I didn't have things set up or didn't have a high enough Java level and other things like that. Okay, you also need to set up a key store and a trust store. And so those must be generated and the certificates stored, and the passwords for that are ultimately going to be stored in the application.yaml file. So I recommend going ahead and setting these up before you start editing your YAML file, because otherwise you're going to go back and forth to that YAML file trying to update pieces and parts. These don't have to be done first, but just letting you know, you are going to have to put the information from this step in that file. The NetView Security Reference Manual contains these commands, and you can largely just cut and paste them to set up your key store and your trust stores. So just some hints and tips on doing this. When you're issuing the key tool commands, make sure that you are in the REST server home directory. And if you issue the key tool command from the key store directory, remove the key store / that I have highlighted in blue here from the actual command, so to make sure that it'll work. And I just have a kind of note here at the bottom. There are 3 commands in the NetView security reference. And one of our cases that came in was somebody did 2 of the commands and forgot to do the 3rd. So this is just a reminder that there are 3 commands, and make sure that you do all 3 of them because they do matter. Okay, so here's some of the symptoms and problem resolutions that I personally ran into. I don't think we had any clients run into these. But the first one was that I got a message saying key tool not found when I tried to set up the key store. Well, my Java level on my system was pretty much ancient in its /profile. It was all the way back at like Java 1.3. So the key tool command didn't work. So once I got my Java updated, that problem went away and updated my path environment variable to also point to that Java level. The next problem was this one here, where was unable to load a DLL module because there wasn't enough storage. And this is where you need to have an appropriate ulimit size. I set mine to unlimited, but your system programmers may have a maximum value, so you would need to consult with them. For a reference on that command, you can see the ZOS Unix System Services command reference book. And then a key tool error. This is where I mentioned make sure you're in the proper directory to issue the actual key tool command. So the REST server home directory is the directory you should be in if you're going to just cut and paste those commands from our security reference book. Okay, so now that you've got your key store and trust store, let's go ahead and set up your application.yaml file. So the first thing you'll want to look at is your port. Our default port is 3275. If you can use that, great. You don't have to change anything. If you want to change the logging from info to debug or some other setting, then you'll need to review that and make your decision. I do suggest that you might want to set that to debug as you're initially setting up the REST server, once so you can see more messages if things are going wrong. However, it is a bit verbose, so once you get the REST server up and working, you probably want to set that back to info just to get the basic messages. You do need to update the passwords for the key store and the trust store. There are 3 places in the YAML file to do that. And as I mentioned before, if you don't want to set this NV REST config environment variable, then you'll need to hard code the path names represented by that environment variable. So the only things that you absolutely must change in this file is the password for the key store and trust store. Of course, if you need to use a different port, you'll have to change that. I've already mentioned about the fact that you might want to set debug on. And then one of the questions we got from a user was, do these file permissions have to stay in edit mode once we've set everything up? And no, you can absolutely change the file permissions to read only after you're done with this file and everything is working. Okay, so now let's move on to customizing the NetView program. And we have 3 CNM style statements here, essentially defining the auto task to use with the REST server. And we use the command serve capability, command server in NetView with our REST server. So all you need to do is copy these statements over to your CNM style user member and uncomment them. You can change the auto task name here, but everything else, no changes are necessary. One comment here though, if you copied these statements prior to applying our level set APAR, which is the 58819 one here, prior to the level set, the auth sender value said yes instead of no. So you will need to make that change. You'll also need to customize the JCL, EJN SSRST, which is found in our CNM SAMP dataset. There is a Java home setting in this JCL, but that setting is not adequate for the REST server to start 100% correctly because additional processes are spawned when the REST server starts. Okay, so some other things that happen depending on how you've customized your NetView. If you have removed or changed the default NetView suppression character, that causes a problem right now. In CANSLog and NetLog, you will get this DSI 072A remote command aborted message with a 448 return code. And if you look at your REST server debug log, you'll see these messages here, depending, of course, with your user ID inserted with the question mark here. And if you're doing a try it out from the Swagger web page, it just spins when you're issuing commands. So the expectation is that the default NetView suppression character was configured, and that's what's causing this issue. We do have an APAR created to fix this problem, but that APAR is still currently open. So the current workaround is to go back and put the default suppression character in. Okay, so setting up user IDs for the REST server. This is one that often gets missed and wasn't documented really clearly initially. So the REST server address space MVS user ID must also be defined as a NetView operator ID. And the reason for this is to facilitate communication between the server and the NetView program. And the NetView command serve interface, like I mentioned before, is used with the server. So this user ID should have an OMVS segment with a UID, and you can actually use this particular user ID to authenticate with the REST server. It probably would not be typical in your environment, but you could do that if you're just trying to see if you can get logged on to the REST server and all your other config is, good before you start adding NetView operator IDs to use with the REST server. So that's your second step. So your NetView operator IDs have to be defined to SAF, even if you're not using a NetView OpperSec SAF security option and you're using NetVPW. And these NetView operators, of course, need an OMVS segment and they need a UID. It does not have to be a super user UID. Also, our NetView command authorization is done using the same user ID that authenticates to the REST server. There's no user switch end to end in there. So whatever you authenticate to the REST server with, that's the same user ID we're going to validate on whether you can run the commands that you sent over through the REST APIs. And you will get a 401 return code from the authentication REST API if there's any incorrect setup here. Okay, And our last step on this side of things is related to starting and stopping the REST server. Always use the NetView commands to start and stop. The start REST serve equals asterisk and the equivalent stop. This is very similar to the start Unix serve if you've ever used the NetView Unix server or CNME Unix in NetView. And the reason is that you need to do this is because the REST server will not start successfully if you just start the JCL. And that's because there's some PPI exchanges between the NetView start command and the REST server. Also, when you get the 633I message that says start or stop command completed successfully, it just means that the start or stop command has completed its processing. For the REST server to completely start, you might need to wait a little bit after this because it's communicating, making sure it has its network communication set up and ready to go before it's truly ready to run for you. Okay, so a little bit of troubleshooting here. So most of the problems with setup will not be discovered until you try to start the REST server, you try to authenticate to it, and then sometimes when you issue commands to it. And to help out with problem solving, note messages that are received in Swagger output if you're playing with it that way. Look at the REST server log files output, particularly the debug log. And then don't forget to look in cans log or netlog because there could be messages there as well. Okay, just a few other scenarios here. So a Java IO file not found exception for key store. This is an indication that the key store and trust store were not configured. You can also get this very odd message about failing to decrypt safe contents with bad padding exception, etc. here, because Java home wasn't set correctly. And this is what I ran into with just Java home set in the startup procedure for the REST server, but not in my Etsy profile. But also, if your passwords aren't matching what you set and what's configured in the application.yaml file, that can also cause this error. So make sure once you set those passwords that you put them in a safe place so you can pull them out and verify them if you run into something like this. And then the last thing, this is one I also ran into. I got this ICH 420i message that said that CEE.skirun2 was essentially an uncontrolled data set. And that happened when I was trying to authenticate to the REST server. So you'll need to add that data set to the SAF program class. And I actually have both CEE.skirun and skirun2 program controlled on my system. Okay, so now we're getting more towards the PPI side of things with some troubleshooting scenarios. So you can get this first one here, which is a return code 26 when you're issuing a command. And this could be because you don't have auth sender equals no. It most likely means you have yes here for some reason or another. If you get a PPI return code 24 for auth receiver, it means either the subsystem interface is down or the PPI opt equals PPI is not specified in the subsystem interface startup procedure. Other PPI errors ensure that the REST server, PPI receiver, EJN REST is active using the DIS PPI command. And if you get additional return codes, those are all documented in our NetView application programmer's guide. Okay, and then this is one of the final APARs here. If you send a command that's greater than 255 mixed case characters, you will get an invalid command message. And so you'll need to apply OA 60170 for this. We don't have a workaround for this without the maintenance. Okay, so let's take a look at the Swagger UI here. So once you bring this page up, you will see just some general information over here at the top. You will also see our API categories, and we have a few here. So if we select the task API, you can actually see a description of that particular API. You can see the parameters. In this case, you can specify a different domain than your local domain. And then over on the right, there's a try it out button for each of the different APIs. And you can actually try these out and see what data that you get back. So what you will see in responses is you will see a return code, a list of return codes, and sometimes you will see some sample output. And this is all before you actually try anything out. This is just all part of the Swagger page. So if you want to actually try it out, so let's fill in a domain name here. And then you're going to click on this execute bar. But just a really hot tip, you have to do the authentication API before you run any of the other APIs. When I first started playing with this, I would forget to do the authentication API every time, and my commands would fail, and I'd sit there and I'd go, all right, what's going on here? So don't forget that authentication API, because you're not going anywhere until you get authenticated, and then you can go do the different APIs. And in this scenario where we tried out the task API, we got a return code 200, which means it's all good. And you see, this is essentially task util output. We actually reverse the way the output comes. So you get the NetView summary data first, and then you'll get information returned for each individual task with the different utilization metrics for all the different tasks in NetView. Okay, so now let's talk about how you can get data from multiple NetViews with one REST server. So this is a question that I've received from multiple clients, and they'll a lot of times get things partially set up, but not totally set up. And so this is just going to be some instructions on how you can do this. So a lot of clients want to have 1 or 2 REST servers for their entire enterprise, or 1 per sysplex, but they also want to have high availability of being able to retrieve this data. And so when they've been setting up their environments, problems that have been run into when they're not seeing data returned can be because of a lot of different reasons. So if the local NetView domain, you're not seeing data, it could be lack of authenticating to the REST server. It could be the suppression character problem that I mentioned. It could be incorrect command authorization. It could be that the data that they're wanting to retrieve requires additional NetView configuration to get the data to return. So sometimes it's a NetView function that's been around for a long time, and they just haven't enabled that function in their product. Also, we do have a bit of data in Service Management Unite that leverages the NetView REST server and these REST APIs. So it's also possible there could be something related to the SMU configuration that's causing the issue. Most of the time, there's not too many problems getting data for the local domain. The issues tend to come more with setting up your remote NetView domains. So that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation here. So to get this high availability at an enterprise level or sysplex level, you need to set up and configure a Sysplex Master NetView program, which allows you to contact NetView domains within the Sysplex. And if you want to do an Enterprise Master, then you will need a Sysplex Master plus set up an Enterprise Master NetView program. And the Enterprise Master NetView allows you to contact NetView domains anywhere in your enterprise if you configure it to do so. And the Enterprise Master NetView program can reside on a standalone system or a system in a Sysplex. And I'm going to show you scenarios for both of those. Okay, so the Sysplex Master and the Enterprise Master functions have been in NetView since NetView 5.4. So I'm going to go through that information pretty quickly here and treat it more as a little bit of a refresher, but provide enough information so you can hopefully understand here. So with our Sysplex Master, we have 3 roles. Your NetView program can either be what we call a Master NetView, a Master Capable, or a basic NetView. And the way that these roles get set are based on what we call an XCF.rank value. A 250 will automatically make your NetView a Sysplex Master, provided it's the first one up and there's no other NetViews in your Sysplex that also set XCF.rank equals 250. If there's multiple with 250, whoever's up first wins in that scenario. So for Master Capables, we recommend coding your ranks of 1 to 249. If the Master goes away, then the highest ranked Master Capable NetView program will take over the Master role. An XCF rank of 0, which we call a basic, it can participate in all the Sysplex stuff. It's just, it can never become a Master NetView program. Okay, so then in this example within a Sysplex, we have the REST server active over here in system NMP IPL 12, and it's inactive over in NMP 190. But in order for failover and high availability to happen, you're going to need a REST server configured and ready to be started. You can use a devipa for the address for the REST server. And then you can use automation to set NMP 190 to master very quickly. Excuse me, in just a minute. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about configuring the Sysplex Master NetView program. So we use XCF services to establish a Sysplex-wide group. DSIPLXNN 01 is the value for NN by default. And just to clarify, this is not the same XCF group that system automation uses. So they do not conflict with each other at all. And each NetView instance in the Sysplex can be a member of the group. And as I've talked about the different values for the roles, the only one I haven't talked about is -1. And that means it's not participating in the Sysplex group and it won't be seen by the Sysplex master. And so if you configure that, then you will not be able to retrieve data from that system with the REST API unless you have a REST server specifically configured on the same system with that NetView instance. Okay, so the easiest way to get a system to automatically be a master when that NetView is started is to set the rank to 250. Out of the box, we ship with an XCF rank of 1. And what that means is if all of them have a 1 and you don't care which one is the master, it's going to be, I'll call it a little bit of a crapshoot, depending on which one comes up first at any given time. So my suggestion is go ahead and set this rank of 250. And that way you know which one's going to come up to be your master. You should have at least one master capable NetView program in your Sysplex, because if your master NetView goes down or you take it down for maintenance, then you're going to lose visibility into the sysplex. And I've kind of talked through the rest of this here about being able to use a devipa. You must have a REST server configured on your backup system. But the automation that I mentioned, we have a NetView command that lets you promote a NetView to master, no matter what's configured, by issuing this, what we call Plex control command. You can say Plex control rank equals 250. So if you have some automation, if you're failing over, if your master NetView goes down, then you can use that command to force another NetView to automatically become the master quickly. Okay, and then the last thing you need to make sure of is if you're using a secops.opersec SAF option in NetView, you need to make sure that the AutoXCF and AutoXDSC auto task are started and defined to SAF. This has been a common problem when clients have been trying to set this up. They don't have these auto tasks defined to staff. And then you can use our list status equals XCF groups command to see if everything is correct. And so you can see here the 3 systems in the sysplex. We have 1 in each role. You can see the different ranks that we've configured as well. There's some flags out to the right, but those aren't really important for purposes of making sure things are working okay. Okay, so let's talk about an enterprise master environment here. So scenario 1 is where your enterprise master is actually out here as a monoplex or local system. And you're going to configure statements to this enterprise master NetView program, which I'll show you what you need to configure shortly. And then you could have a backup enterprise master that's also a monoplex outside the sysplex. But what we end up doing based on configuration is we establish remote command connections outbound from the enterprise master to all the systems in the sysplex, as well as to your backup NetView if you set it up this way for data flow. And so requests will flow outbound and responses will flow inbound. And you see I have a REST server up here with the primary enterprise master. This one's active. This one down here is inactive, but it can fail over there. Again, you can use a devipa for that REST server to help with that failover. And then scenario 2 is if you don't want to have a standalone system out there for your REST server or a NetView, you can actually have an enterprise master NetView program within your sysplex. So in this scenario, you go ahead and you set up your REST server on one system in your sysplex. You can have it fail over to another system in your sysplex if you want to, which you probably will do that as well. In addition, you could have it fail over to the other sysplex to take over. So there's different permutations of things you can do. I'm just trying to give you the basics to help you get started here. This system out here can also be part of your enterprise that this enterprise master NetView can talk to. And again, the remote command connections are going to be established outbound to all these systems. I just didn't draw the green lines here because with this configuration, the green lines would be going all over the place and it'd be a little difficult to see what's going on here. Okay, so with the Enterprise Master NetView program, you definitely need to configure this XCF.rank to 250 because an Enterprise Master NetView program cannot assume that role unless it has a role of master. You also have to configure remote send and remote alias CNM style statements because you have to establish connectivity to an entry point into each sysplex. So you must configure your sysplex master NetView program, and you should configure at least one master capable NetView program. Now, I say it's optional, but you should do it because if you lose that sysplex master and that's all you configured and that NetView goes down, you just lost insight into that entire sysplex. You also need an entry point into any standalone systems which you want to retrieve data from. There's also an int.systems CNM style user statements need to be configured. You need one for each sysplex and one for each standalone system. And this int.systems uses the remote alias value as its value. And then just again, specify a second system as an entry point for your sysplexes. Okay, so the Enterprise Master NetView program does require the Discovery Tower to be enabled. And I know a lot of clients don't use this because they're like, well, that looks like what system automation discovers. They're really totally different functions. But you can turn off almost all of the Discovery Tower functions by setting this discovery.netview only equals yes in your CNM style user member. And that will automatically set your FCF rank to 0. So you're going to need one system in your Plex there and probably 2 that don't have this set. But this setting actually prevents discovery of IP management resources. We will continue to discover NetView health information, but that's not a big overhead. We're just essentially getting a little bit of information about storage, CPU utilization, etc. And like with our Sysplex master implementation, we do have a couple of auto tasks here that you need to make sure are defined to SAP if you're using a secops.opersec SAP option with NetView. So we have the auto EDAT, which is used for remote command connections, and auto AON, which is used by Discovery Manager. Okay, so here's some sample configuration statements for the Enterprise Master. A lot of folks have problems with these, so I just provided some examples. And here's a scenario where the int.systems only have one domain configured. Now, this is a standalone system, so that's okay. But for your sysplexes, you know, just the warning again, if that one goes down, then the Enterprise Master can't contact the rest of your sysplex. And then this is a big list status equals XCF groups to see if everything is correct. Okay, and lastly, if you're using Service Management Unite, you can, when you first come in to NetView, you can see the different NetViews that you have access to, as well as their roles here. And so you can select a row for your specific domain you want to retrieve data from, and you can specify the different capabilities that you want to use here. Okay, so that's it. And just more information here. We do have a somewhat new customer forum location. So this is the link to register. There's a registration button down at the bottom. And once you register, your request will be reviewed, and then you'll get accepted for that. This is the new doc link for documentation that everybody just loves. There's a little bit of tongue in cheek there. These are some other links to information about our service management suite, our automation suite, system automation, other high-level web pages here. And then lastly, just, I know NetView has a lot of books, and a lot of times we get questions on, well, how do we know which NetView book to look in? I don't even know where to start. So this still says Knowledge Center, so I apologize for that. But essentially, even with the new doc website, we have a zip file out there that you can download the PDF books. And when you unzip that, you will actually have a .pdx file and an HTML file. The HTML file lists the book titles. So if you know what book you want to go to, you can go straight to that book. But the function that I use 95% of the time now is this PDX file. So if you double click on this file, you can search the entire library using this search window that pops up. You just type in whatever phrase you want to type in here, and it's going to show you every book that has that word or that phrase. And then if you expand these little plus signs here, it will show you every line in the book that shows it. And you can click on that line and it will open the book and take you straight to that page. So it's the best facility that ever came about for searching books that I've seen so far. Okay, so that's everything. So please submit your session feedback. This is session 6BI. And if you need information on becoming a member of GSC US UK, here's the information for that. So thank you very much for attending, and we will see if there are any questions here.
Hi, Pam. There are no questions in the chat yet. If anybody wants to raise a question, I can unmute the lines. That's what you need.
Yeah, and I can stop screen sharing here. And so I can see if there's any questions there. Let's see.
No questions?
So everybody's an expert now. For those of you that might have joined a minute or two late, the slides are uploaded. So you can review those. And if you have questions, you know, at a later time, you can send me an email directly.
No questions at the moment? Oh, you got one question in? The key store? Do you see it?
Hold on a second. Let me open the chat. Okay, there we go. The key store for the REST server. Any plans for a RACF keyring? Dave, we do have an RFE to use RACF certificates. Would that resolve the issue, or would it need to be a keyring specifically?
Dave, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask the question.
Okay, that will be a lot easier. Yeah, as long as it's a solution in RACF, it doesn't really matter what that solution is. It's just they've got a real downer on having things in file systems.
Okay. I don't have the RACF, the RFE number available off the top of my head. It's a fairly recent one, and it is from a client who was actually using the REST server and was able to go ahead and do it. So I can, Dave, I have your email. I could shoot you that, or I've stopped sharing.
That'll be good, but there's no massive urgency because I'm nowhere near installing this yet, but I will need to run it all past the security people before I even start.
Well, I'm not screen sharing, so if you guys want to hold on for a second while I pull that up real quick, I can get it for you.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Okay.
And Pam, do you also have Westy's email?
I do not. So that's why I'm trying to bring it up right now, Niall, and I'll put that in the chat. I just have to log on to where that is.
And Westy, everybody can unmute themselves.
Oh, good. It's not letting me connect this morning. All right. Let's try this one. Looks like that server's down, of course, right now.
Live demo.
Well, I wasn't trying to demo it. I was just trying to get a number. Yeah. Okay. So if I tell you what, if you guys can shoot me an email, or if you want to put your email in the chat, I'll put my email here again for you all. I can send you the RFE number. I was actually just going through them all yesterday. But yeah, I can actually shoot you the developer links, developer works link, and then you can just go vote on it. And so we're going to do it. I just don't know the time frame yet of when we're going to do it. So I can tell you that much at this point. It's not an uncommitted candidate state there, but it will be soon.
Good stuff. Thanks, Pam.
Sure. Any other questions? Because if that's an impediment to deploying, we'll want to, try to get that done, get that prioritized. But the more votes, of course, helps.
Any other questions or comments for Pam? Okay, Pam, thank you very much. There doesn't seem to be any more questions coming in.
Okay,
So
well, they know
we'll
how
end
to
the meeting
find
now.
me.
They do. Okay, thanks everybody. Don't forget to fill in your feedback form.
Okay, thanks, Niall. Thanks everybody
you.
for attending.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.